As someone who encourages people to catch honeybee swarms instead of buying packages, I talk a lot about how to prepare a swarm trap, how to bait it, what to put inside, where to hang it. And I did a whole video about that. If you're interested in learning how to set up a swarm trap to catch your own free bees. But one thing that a lot of people, including myself, don't cover is what do you do after the swarm catch. So I'm going to talk today and demonstrate what follows the swarm catch and give you some recommendations. I'm back here with Justin from the YouTube channel Homestead Refuge, and we are about to move the swarm that he had caught here on his property into his hive. The swarm was caught in a tree not far from here. What would you say, a couple hundred yards away?
Yep.
And if we had just taken the swarm from that tree, moved it directly into this box, then the foragers that had already oriented to that location would go right back to that tree where they assumed home is. So we couldn't just move that box directly over here. I took the swarm trap to my home, which is several miles away, and let the bees orient to that location. Now we're going to put the bees into Justin's box and let them orient to this location. When you're transporting your swarm in their box, it's important, especially with the lay-ins frames with the deep comb, to have the frames in line with the direction of travel. That way, if you have any sudden stops or sudden starts, your comb is going to be supported on edge where it would be stronger, rather than if it were turned sideways and all that comb were to swing and move with the stops and starts of the vehicle. A lot of people ask how long the bees should be left in the swarm trap once they move in before you move them to a hive or start that process of getting them to their hive. Some prefer to move that swarm right away before the bees have really done any orientation, so that you don't have to worry about the bees reorienting to their location. You can just move them right to the hive. I prefer not to disturb the bees that early for fear that if they have just moved in and not gotten established, they may just decide to swarm again and go somewhere else. Instead, I prefer to leave the bees in until the colony is established in that swarm trap. And a good sign that that has happened is that the bees are bringing in pollen. It's not a guarantee, but when the bees are carrying in pollen, that can be a good sign that the queen is laying eggs. One more thing I want to mention about when to take down that swarm trap is that I do like to wait until the bees are established, but anywhere beyond that, then that swarm trap is just going to get heavier as the bees are foraging and bringing in nectar and resources, and as they're growing their population. If you have that swarm trap in a location where you have to go up on a ladder to get it, or anywhere that might be a little more challenging to lower that swarm trap down, keep in mind that it's just going to put on weight the longer it's up there. We set the swarm trap right in front of the hive. So the entrance in the hive that they'll be going in and out of is right behind the entrance of the swarm trap. Now these bees are coming out, foragers are starting to fly their little figure-8 orientation patterns and get themselves accustomed to this location.
You put the swarm trap in front of this box, this hive, and you face the entrances like the exact same way. Is that really important? I mean, if you put it next to it or you put it somewhere else?
As long as the entrance is close to where the entrance for the hive will be, that's really what's important, because once we remove that box, bees are going to be coming back looking for that entrance.
Right.
Now, in this case, having the entrance directly in front of the hive entrance, when the bees come back looking for it, it's just a straight line. They just need to come back a little farther. There's the entrance. If it's to the side, then they might have to search a little more.
Yeah.
But they'll work it out.
Within
a couple feet, they'll figure it out.
Does weather have any factor? Does it matter when you're transporting the bees and when you're reestablishing a swarm in a new hive?
We're out here working today, and it's about 90 degrees, going to be above 90 today. And I know Justin is warm inside of his suit because I'm warm without wearing a full suit. As far as the weather, and obviously, you know, talking about different weather factors, you wouldn't really want to move the bees or open the box and be moving frames in the rain.
Okay.
You know, so any type of inclement weather, if the bees are not going to be pleasant to work with. As far as heat, The swarm traps are generally thin-walled boxes, and when we transport them, of course, we have the entrances closed. I do leave the entrance disc set to ventilation when I'm transporting the bees, but still, they don't have the opportunity for some of the bees to get outside of the hive to help cool the inside. I do try not to leave them in the hive any longer than necessary. If I am transporting a swarm trap, I'll close down the hive late at night or very early in the morning, and then load it up and take it somewhere in the morning. I wouldn't leave them in there all day and then take them somewhere in the afternoon. So the less time in a hot box, the better for the bees. And also better for the comb. You know, if it's really hot, we could, and they have honey stored up in there, we could run into incidences of comb collapse if the bees aren't able to circulate air and cool the inside of that box. So heat can be a factor. We just do what we can to mitigate it by not leaving the bees in that little box.
Yeah. Especially in the sun.
Especially in the sun, any longer than necessary.
Right.
When you're moving that swarm trap, you do want to move it either a short distance to the hive, just a few feet. You have you mentioned 3 feet or 3 miles, and that's kind of a rule of thumb. Some people will say 2 feet or 2 miles. Some people will say 5 feet, 5 miles. The point is, if you move from the swarm trap to the hive just a few feet, the bees will usually be able to sort it out. If you move it a farther distance, up to a couple miles, whether you consider the 2 mile, 3 mile, 5 mile rule, if it's within that distance, let's say you move it just a mile, the bees are within their range that they may try to return back to the original location.
And if there's nothing there, then what would they do? They just like swarm up and ball up? And...
Yeah, and if they try to go back to the original location, then you'll end up with a cluster of bees at that location.
Yeah.
And some people, if they move a box, a swarm trap, a fairly short distance, they'll take another box, put it back at the original location.
Yeah.
So the foragers will get caught there. And then the next day they'll move those foragers and kind of like repeat the process.
Oh, yeah.
And over time, more foragers will get the idea. They'll kind of go ahead and reorient. But that can be a tedious process.
Yeah.
Another approach a lot of people will use, or at least I've heard people recommend, is to take a bunch of branches, leafy branches, and put those in front of your entrance. So when the bees come out, they're going to have a lot of obstacles there that's going to cause them to realize something is different and force them to reorient. Now, I have tried that approach at my own home because I have a swarm trap in the tree in my front yard, and then my hives in the backyard.
Yeah.
And we're talking a distance of about 80 feet.
Yeah.
And so when I move those swarm traps, sometimes I'll just go ahead and take the swarm trap, move it to the backyard. And I've tried putting the branches in front, and I've had about, I'm just going to say about 50% effectiveness with that. Maybe I'm not making it brushy enough. Maybe I'm leaving too many gaps. Sometimes if it's a windy day, I've gone out and found that my branches that I've set in front of it have blown over. And so I lose the entire effectiveness. I just haven't found it to be a foolproof method. Moving the hive a farther distance, multiple miles, and then bringing it back seems to be more reliable. I don't know what it is in the bees' makeup that tells them that we're so far from home now that we have to reorient. You can see as the bees come out, the first thing they did was not to take off and forage. They start, flying little figure-8 patterns to kind of get themselves oriented to this location. That's their first action when they come out. So something about the distance is telling them that this is a new location.
We have the swarm in front of the box now. Is it just as simple as taking the lid off and putting the frames in the new box?
Yeah, just that simple. As long as we have compatible frames, so we have a lay-in swarm trap going into a lay-in's hive, it's just directly moving the frames into the hive. There's a couple things that we want to consider as we move those frames over. One is that we want to keep the frames in the same configuration that they are in the swarm trap. Some people have expressed concern about the change in the orientation of the frames, because in the swarm trap we have the frames going this way with the entrance in front of the frames, whereas in the hive we're going to have the frames going this way with the entrance to the side of the frames. I haven't found that's been an issue at all, but it does bring up the question when you move the frames over, which frames should go towards the end. There's a couple arguments we can make, and I'll tell you where I what I usually consider. There is the argument of trying to put the frames that are closest to the entrance, so the frames that are closest to the front, putting those closest to the entrance in here. And that's one approach. But in the swarm trap, we started with a frame of old comb at the back. And that's where the bees are going to start building. So from that comb at the back, they're going to be building forward. So their brood is going to be from the back working forward. Because in the hive, we want the brood closest to the entrance, we're going to put the back frame on the end and then work away from that. So as the frames go towards the front of the swarm trap, they're going to go farther into the hive.
Why do you want the brood closest to the entrance?
The bees will generally organize in the horizontal hive so that their brood is closest to the entrance.
Okay. And then the honey is farther away.
And the honey is farther away.
Did you put the old comb frame in the back of the swarm trap? Was that for a reason?
Yes, because when the bees go in and check out that swarm trap, we have the old comb in there because it gives the smell that bees have lived there before. It's a familiar smell. It has lots of smell of the brood and the wax and propolis and everything that's on that comb. But when the bees go into that swarm trap, they're also looking to make sure that there's enough space for their colony to build. By putting that frame at the back, we've left open space throughout the rest of the box. So although they have all the smells in there, the first thing they encounter when they go into the box is not a barrier of comb.
Gotcha.
It's open space where they can build.
Yeah.
A person may have a swarm trap that has the entrance on the end. That would make it, even simpler for moving the frames over. If we set it up the same way, we'd have the entrance facing out, and we just take the frames and put them right into the hive. One other thing that somebody might encounter when they're moving frames from their swarm trap, especially if they've forgotten to put foundation on the frames or anything, is cross combing across the frames. And so if you get into your swarm trap and you find that those frames are tied together with cross comb, one thing that you can do is just take a piece of wood, maybe if you have a top bar or something, you can cut down to size and screw that to the tops of the frames so that they're all tied together. And then lift them all out together and put them right into your hive. And then from there on out, now at some point you will probably want to come back and clean up that cross comb. But from there on out, you can add frames with foundation so that they'll start building nice, neat comb from there.
I can imagine that would be a nightmare if they start doing that.
It could be a real mess,
A big mess,
Yeah, and I mean, and you may not clean it up all in one go. You may go in and pull the end frame,
at a time,
kind of straighten things out, cut off some of the comb so it's kind of more straight. But that's one way to deal with that without tearing up that comb.
How many frames do we have in this swarm trap then?
There's 7 frames in the swarm trap. I think they may have 1 or 2 frames that are still left to be built out.
So just leave those.
So we'll decide what we want to do with those. We may replace those. I think a lot of the frames that we put in the swarm traps use the craft sticks instead of any sort of foundation that had the comb imprint on it.
How did that work?
They seem to work all right. Once the bees start building on the craft stick, they seem to do all right. But sometimes it seems like they're a little slow to want to build on the craft stick.
When you're adding foundation, I mean, these were ones that I made. I had to cut that to the right size and then, melted it with the, the computer charger trick. Hooking it up and did that. But, so you're saying you just had wooden craft sticks on here. How did you fasten those on there?
The frames that I make, I put a groove along the top, on the inside of that top bar. So I can take those craft sticks and just glue them into that groove.
So just with wood glue?
And
then they still have the wire?
They still have the wire.
So that the
Plus,
wires
when you put the stick in there, the wires kind of hold it in place. And the same thing with wax foundation. When I use wax foundation, I'll put it, kind of wedge it into that groove, and the wires kind of pinch it into place there.
I never thought of making a groove up there.
I still will embed the foundation into the wires just to kind of hold it, but that groove, with the wire kind of pinching it in place, it kind of holds it there. So you're ready to move the frames in?
Yeah, I think so. You want to switch sides? Well, or you want me to? Oh yeah, I forgot. This is my show now.
Your bees, your hive.
Oh boy.
As we pull these out, because we started with the frame of full comb at the back, and the bees are going to be building towards the front, we'll start pulling frames from the front. That's where they're less likely to have built. We'll have fewer bees there and less comb to mess up.
Okay.
Mess up as we're pulling it out, so we can pull those frames out and get them out of our way to work with the rest of the frames. Because they haven't built that yet, we'll kind of set this to the side and decide what frames we want to put in there. So we'll go ahead and put it in the hive.
Okay.
Just kind of put it in here. Since we're pulling from the front of the box going back, we're going to be working our way, backwards, starting in here and moving back towards the wall. But this frame we may or may not be putting in there with the rest. So that one you can see where they have built down. They start at 2 different spots and built down off of those craft sticks. Got a little bit of nectar stored up in there. And just like you turned that one, we want to make sure to turn all of them the same way so they have the same orientation as they go in.
That one's considerably heavier.
Alright, so we've got more comb. Again, they built that off of those craft sticks. Have quite a bit more comb built down. And all they have stored up in there is nectar right now. What do they have on the other side?
Is that
more nectar and a little capped honey at the top. On this frame, well, I should ask you, Justin, we've looked at the hives a little bit. What are you seeing on this frame?
Is that brood?
Yep, we got capped brood on there. And if we look at the cells,
is that capped honey then up there?
That's capped honey at the top.
Okay. So
and we don't have a lot of light now. Some of these cells they backfilled with nectar. You can see the nectar, the shiny nectar down in there.
Yep.
If you look down through here, there's probably some larvae in there. But then on the other side,
oh, there's a lot of honey at the top and some more capped brood.
Yeah, so they got a lot of those cells that would be brood cells. They're kind of backfilling with nectar, although there's some empty ones towards the bottom. As we're getting closer to winter especially, we're going to see them backfilling more of the top of that frame with nectar, and then they'll build the comb down and that brood will kind of move farther down as they go.
You're storing up more resources.
Right. Now we have 6 out of the 7 frames from the swarm trap in our hive. Well, we have all 7 in here, but one of them is completely empty, and we probably won't include that in the hive right now. We've got this first frame that had a couple small bits of comb that they've started building. We've got the second frame that has about 40% built out, but they have room to build in here, and their population isn't yet built up that they're going to be running out of space anytime soon, especially as we're getting towards the end of the nectar flow now. So we're going to limit that space, and that reduces the amount of space that small hive beetles will have to run and possibly get a footing in there. So we'll leave them with 6 frames right now, let them keep going. For the most part, they look like they're fairly healthy. We didn't see the nice solid brood patterns that we'd like to see from a textbook perspective.
Yeah.
They did have some capped brood that's getting close to emerge, and they do have some eggs in there. So for whatever reason, we didn't see a lot of larvae in the stages in between the eggs and the capped brood, but we know the queen is in there because of the presence of eggs. So we'll just let them go about their work and keep going.
Yeah.
Now we have the bees in the box that we need to get in here and get that box moved.
There's still quite a few left in there.
And before we do that, I'm going to take a quick look in here to make sure we don't have the queen running around. So looking in there for the queen, obviously we would look just to see if we could see the queen.
Yeah.
But also looking for any place where we might see bees surrounding the queen. Kind of look for what's different. Look for bees behaving differently and tending the queen. And I'm not seeing anything in there. I'm just seeing bees milling about.
Yep.
So now our technique is basically to shake them out. The important thing is to try not to squish bees in between the boxes.
They're on the outside here.
Yeah, they're on the outside. So we'll scoot this over a little bit so those on the outside can kind of fall in.
Oh wow. You broke one of your
frames. My gosh. Well, at least it was my frame, not yours, I guess, if I'm going to break any. We've got a few on this back wall. I'm going to try to bump those in here.
Caught it just right.
Now that we've got the colony in there, and I said they should have plenty of space to build up. And we're coming to the end of our nectar flow, so I wouldn't expect them to really surprise us too much with how much they build up. You'll need to want to come back and put a couple screws on there.
Okay.
So that the bees have a little gap at the bottom to be able to go under that divider board. We will put these other frames right up against the divider board.
Okay.
So what that'll do is that gives kind of a relief valve. Now, there is a little gap here on the end of the divider board.
Yeah.
So the bees do have a way to get through. As I was saying, that's kind of like our pressure relief valve. So if they fill up this space and start going past that divider board, rather than building like on the lid or something, they've got these other frames here, and they'll start using those. Under normal circumstances, even though the bees can go, go past the divider board, they won't build in this open end unless they run out of space within the hive.
And they really need it.
Save yourself the mess.
Yeah.
Always leave some frames on the opposite side of the divider board. That also helps to keep that divider board in place. So that's kind of the whole process. Justin caught the swarm. We took the box to my place, brought it back, got it moved in, and now he's got his bees in the hive.
Do you think we would get honey from a hive on the first year, or usually you kind of wait till the second year?
I wouldn't count on getting honey in the first year.
Okay.
Especially how it looks like they've kind of slowed down their building up already. We're now kind of getting towards the end of our spring nectar flow. We will typically see a fall nectar flow. A lot of that, some of our main fall plants are goldenrod and aster. If you have goldenrod around, see it blooming, that's kind of your sign that, okay, we've got the fall nectar flow, we're about done for the winter. It can be tempting as we look at this and we see that they don't have like these huge frames full of brood and everything, to say, well, this is a fairly weak hive, and be really concerned about that. I was mentioning to you earlier that I have learned through experience, never count out the weak hives. I have had several hives that in the first year, they just kind of puttered along, and it took them a little while to really seem like they got going. I didn't get anything from them the first year, but the second year, they took off like a rocket. So it seems like the pattern I see in most of my hives and with most of my queens is that in their first year, they kind of get things organized. The second year, they produce. And then the third year, if I had a great queen, that second year, that third year, I'll use her to make splits for future colonies.
Gotcha. And
keep that cycle going.
Yeah.
And that's pretty typical of most hives. Is I wouldn't expect to harvest in that first year. It's possible if they really start building up, you might get a frame of honey out of them this fall, if we have a really good fall nectar flow especially, but otherwise it's unlikely. I hope that this talk through what to do once you've caught your swarm and our demonstration of moving the swarm into Justin's hive has been helpful for you. If you found this video interesting and useful, you might also like this other video that YouTube thinks you'll really like. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you next time.